I had established a publishing house in the Western Cape. So I managed to publish it. Finally, whilst talking as a publisher, I think I go through many manuscripts and I sit on 3 editorial boards. And despite my closeness to the author, I think this is an exemplary piece. And it tells of a history that is often unrecorded and unknown. Some of the facts revealed in the book, her work at magazine and railway barracks, the deplorable conditions, counseling after the 1949 riots, when people lost their homes and family, incest, child abuse, and such things. A little known fact is that Dr. Ramasar and her husband provided shelter for Jay Singh and Monty Naika when they were on the run from the security branch. Another fact is that while she obtained her PhD and was a senior lecturer for many, many years, the racism endemic at the time denied her promotion to full professorship, despite her more than ample qualifications for that. I'm not going to read the parting message of it. I think you should do that in closing off your interaction with Dr. Ramasar. But my last cap that I have to dock tonight is that of grandnephew. Whilst Ami writes in the book of Dr. Ramasar's father, he fails to write about her mother, who was quite a figure in her own right. She was Manfred Pramda, later Manfred Sobrin, and she was known for her acerbic wit. I think that's something Pramda also inherited from her mom. And a wonderful story that Pramda once told me was when her mom was getting on a tram in Esmond Road, and excuse me for sharing this. It may have been confidential at the time. When her mom was getting on a tram, and Salvan, the director of the 1860 Heritage Center, you may be interested in this fact that Indians well, Puris in general, were referred to as Sammies and Marys by their white overalls. And when getting onto this tram, Manfred Sobrin was asked to buck up Mary, to which she replied to the conductor, "Are you talking about the Queen of Scotland or the Mother of Jesus?" And I think that's the kind of acerbic wit that Pramda inherited. And in saying those few words, can I just hand over these mics to Ami, a seasoned veteran journalist and member of the family also, and my grand aunt, Dr. Pramda Ramasar. Thank you.
Such a picture of gathering over here. I don't know whether to address my aunt or the author in a professional capacity, or just refer to her as poor as I've known her all my life. Well, congratulations for the publication of your book. It spans, I know, 50 years as far as you are concerned, but as far as we are concerned, it goes back 70 years, or over 70 years, back up to the 1949, 50 years. It's been a long journey. What inspired this interest in social work, and how did you get there?
Thank you. It wasn't, I wouldn't call it inspired. I wasn't inspired to write this. I was disgusted, and that is why the writing came out. As far as I was concerned, I chose a profession that took me right into the heart of the community. And for those years that I worked in that community, I found a very cruel kind of contradiction between the values of the service, or rather the profession that I had trained in, and the people who I was going to go and help after becoming a social worker, qualified social worker. For me, that contradiction created a sort of intellectual burden. And I could go to work every day and come back, and while I'm driving back home, I would worry about what I saw for the day. And that sort of built up in me. And I used to sort of evaluate things, analyze things, understand. Of course I knew the answers for it. Why? Because, I didn't have to, before I applied for admission to university, it was not a university for me, it was the Natal University College, and it was still part of UNISA. And we enrolled at that college, and we had no big university to go to, and that was straight away something that showed me that just watch out for the future. We were not strangers to discrimination in the country. We knew all about the discrimination. You went to the beach and you saw seats there, whites only. And if you went anywhere else, you'd find the same sort of thing. We went to separate schools. We went to, and therefore we had to go and enroll at the University College in the town, which was housed in, what do you call those? We had, one was an asbestos one, and the other two were brick buildings, and that accommodated the students' common room and administration. And then, of course, we had a kind of a library that brought some books from Natal University College, and we made the best use of that. And we had this rather large asbestos building, and in which we had about 200 students going for classes just to make sure that we didn't miss Elizabeth Sneddon's lectures. And of course, we used the social college classrooms. And we had hours, for us to look for education, we had to go sacrifice lots and lots of hours and whatnot. And so that is how I was introduced to the university.
And there were challenging times because we in the community had just come out of a mass protest to the passive resistance in 1947, and then followed the tensions between Africans and Indians in the 1949 riots, and a year before that the National Party comes into power, and instead of all these things being equal at that time, it was, you chose to be at university and chose social science as your degree. It was quite a baptism having to go and administer field work, etc., amongst victims of the riots in places like Stella Hill, Melrose, etc. How daunting was that challenge?
Sorry?
How daunting was that challenge?
Oh, that was very daunting indeed. That was our misfortune, that we started university training, and most of the students there were adults who were working, who were teaching, or who were in offices and so on. We were two young ladies just come out of Dartmouth Crescent Indian Girls School, and with the matric, and we were looking for what to do. And of course, that was the year soon after we registered, that the nationalist government came, and of course, with it, the apartheid policy. And then we realized that it's not going to be so easy. We knew, we had already experienced so much of discrimination all over. But this was, for me, a challenge, a real challenge, because to decide again, now what do I do this course? I loved to do that because I like to work with people. And I nevertheless decided, no, I have to. But despite seeing the 48, 49 riots, the Indo-African riots, it's something that we never expected to happen. And then, you know, there we were. Fortunately, of course, we had a mentor like Mr. B.A. Naidu, the late Mr. B.A. Naidu, and he was actually completing a B.A. social science degree while he was still teaching at Sasha College. And he explained to us what social work, social science means, and what it would involve, and that's really. So we decided, well, no, we won't change our minds. We go in for it. It doesn't matter. That's what we are training for, and we will then, learn a little bit more from what we have already studied at university.
Now you mentioned Mr. B.A. Naidu, and the other person that made an impact on your life was Professor Hansi Pollock. These two people made quite an impact on your life. Why?
I think I was the most lucky person to have as the head of our department, Professor Hansi Pollock. Professor Hansi Pollock, I think I saw Mohil in the audience, and I'm sure he's come across the name Pollock. And Professor Hansi Pollock was the head of our department, and she came straight from Andhra, from New York, and she was, I couldn't find another word how to describe that inspiration that she was. And she was just the kind of person who would lead us on in this terrible environment in which we had to work, where the apartheid policies were all the time surrounding us with boundaries all around us. So she was one of those people who I think I was very fortunate. I don't know if any of there aren't too many fellow social workers here, but I don't think so. They had any such person to guide them. And she had come from New York. She had worked in New York and seen, the American policies and so on. And she was too much of an inspiration. We just couldn't while she lectured to us, there was no time to take notes and so on. We just listened to her. And she was just one of those people who, even if I wanted to drop out and not worry about social work because, oh my goodness, this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life, I couldn't have, because here was a person who had come with all of that and known all those things in the American situation. And she gave us a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement.
Whatever that inspiration, there was a sound of you eventually graduate, and it's a time for celebration. There were very few Indians that graduated from university at that time. And then you're looking forward to your graduation ceremony. But the graduation ceremony is now segregated for whites and for non-whites, or blacks.
We couldn't go to that graduation ceremony because the graduation ceremonies at the university, by 1949, the university had already reached full status, university status. And we were marginalized from all that. We couldn't attend any functions that were celebrating that university status awarded to the University College in Natal. And to crown it all, the majority of the non-white students opted not to go to the graduation ceremony because the graduation ceremony was fully discriminated. You know, it was white students went first and got their degrees, and then the non-whites had to go and follow the same thing. So we opted to get out of that, and we didn't attend, and it was the majority of students. I think there were about 2 students who went and attended and got their degrees. But the balance of all of us in that class, in that year, we did not take our first annual degree from. So that was.
So from Durban, you relocate to Singapore. You and your husband, Dr.
We're not
Ramasar,
going to Zoom, we're just going to
manage the affairs of the Amzinto Child and Family Welfare Society as chairman, as secretary, and as chairman. And you are now thrust in the role where the environment changes from an urban to a rural setting. You travel long distances, having to cover places like Bremai, Popo, Harding, etc. And coming across people living in real, squalid, poor conditions. I recall from your book people having to cohabit with animals, with cows and sheep and goats and etc. Living cheek by job with these animals. On a sugar estate, mind you. These were the conditions that you had to experience in your field of work. How much did that contribute to your overall assessment of how the welfare of the people were at that time?
You're right in saying that was rural Natal, and the people in places like Quifa and Nel Esperanto, and they used to call it Eminently, and I think about Natal Durban all the time. And then there was, yes, they used to live in their hovels and their animals, a goat or whatever. And that was something that they just accepted as part of their living. When I came to Durban and got into practice there, the Springtown was none the better. There were animals in the same place, occupying the same room as the human beings. So I thought, well, that was a good combination of nature. But that shows you that they were deprived of good housing. There was a lot of hardship. In those years, people didn't believe, even when we did our fieldwork placement as students, people didn't believe the poverty that existed in the Indian community. And the Indian community had the largest TB rate in the country. And it was thanks to people like Paul Saxon and Foster who tackled that problem, and in what a wonderful way. And I did my field placement at Foster as well. My professor, Nancy Potter, She did, you see, we were not allowed to go into the white organizations in order to do our fieldwork practice or play up or fieldwork training. So we had, and there were very few, or even just one or two Indian organizations, but they didn't have any qualified people to supervise social work students. So my professor went and got into all the unconventional kinds of places where she placed us in order to do our field training. And you know, we had the first time South Africa had primary health care when doctors M.E. and her husband, both the Cox, Dr. Cox, and Dr. David Lando, who was there. Primary health in South Africa was just about budding at the time when these couples were here in Durban trying to do the primary health. But the state intervened and the university intervened. And those people they went away from the country because they had no scope here for their work. And they were not appreciated. So that went, you know, primary health went with them. And what do you see now in health services in South Africa?
When you jog our memory and you go back to 1927, talking about the Organized Workers' Society and the Durban Indian Child Welfare Society was established in 1947. It was of historic significance because that was the year the Agent General of India, Sastry, was in South Africa. And then you referred to another American, I think, I can't recall the name, but why was 1927 of such historic significance?
Sorry?
Why was 1927 of such historic significance for the Durban Indian Child Welfare Society?
In 1924, the first National Council for Child and Family Welfare, child welfare, was established. And 1927, and before that there were about 3 or 4 white child welfare societies. But the Indian child welfare, the first Indian child welfare, Durban Indian, was formed in 1927. And at that meeting, present were the Agent General, Srinivasa Sastry, and Mrs. She was the president of the Madras organization.
She was a magistrate in the presidency in Madras.
And but when this Child Welfare Society was formed, and they applied for membership to the National Council, they were not given membership. They did not allow them to join the National Council. So it didn't take very long, but the Indian Child Welfare, and you know, in the following year, in the years that followed, there were several other Indian child welfares formed in the province of Natal. And together, they formed the Natal Indian Council because they wanted one organization to be their spokesperson at the national level and so on. So they formed the Natal Indian Council, and Durban Indian Child Welfare Society never stopped being the conscience of the Indian community in Durban and the whole of Natal for that matter. And it took up every question with the authorities and argued every question with them. And we had people like Mr. P.R. Patta and Mr. S.O. Singh and Mr. A.M. Rajab questioning the authorities, Durban municipality, the provincial council, and everybody. So, Durban Indian Child Welfare Society was always the fighter in the country. I'm just looking at Praveen, just to remind him about Durban Indian Child Welfare Society. And that's where I spent most of my time. And that's where I gathered all the information from the Indian community. And that's where my, what I call my intellectual burden came along. Because I couldn't bear to see all those things that were happening. And nobody, if you're not a social worker, you would never have known those things about the Indian community. And I would say that over and over again. I've got one colleague here who bear me out on that. And, that is how it was. The Indian communities, together with the other non-white communities, I mean, the other ones were even worse in many respects. But the Indian community had that part of Indian community that would support. But still, there was a lot that was left to be done. And social workers alone couldn't have done it.
Then you come back to 1977 and you say, if the Durban Indian Child Welfare Society and the role the Indian community played in the struggle towards non-racialism, your fight continues at the national level. People like the late AKC, Ravi Govin, Kassim Saluji, yourself, take up the struggle at the national level for this non-racial body.
That was the most exciting part, because that's where the backbone of apartheid took its first salvo from the Indian community. We had the National Council was completely apartheid run. Everything was according to national policy. But the National Council couldn't have done anything about it because they had to work within the law. And they had 4 divisions. It was bad enough having a separate organization and not having a place on that national body. But then the national body had 4 separate divisions, one for each race group. And these divisions used to meet once a year for meetings, and of course, throughout as long as those divisions were around and doing their work, they made every effort to try and see if they can get direct access to the national body, but they couldn't. And every year there were all kinds of resolutions being submitted, and nothing came of those. They completely disregarded all the other groups. The black, the colored, the Indian divisions just were there to do their own work amongst their own communities. But it was in 1977, in the month of July, when we usually had those meetings, that the Indian division stood up and questioned, and no answers were coming, because they had said that there was a resolution taken that there will be some sort of a change, and nothing happened in the year before that, during that year. So at that meeting, one of the Indian societies, one of the members stood up and asked a question, and there was no reply. And the whole board was there, the national board. And so when there was no reply, then the three divisions decided, well, let's forget about this meeting, and we will have a separate resolution, and that resolution should be put into effect before we come again to another meeting like this together. So as I said, that was the first time that a direct attack was made on, that started breaking the back of the apartheid people in the National Council. And after months of struggle and so on again, finally the National Council had to change its constitution. And that was for us a victory over the national body. And we realized that now we can do without the Natal Council, the Natal Indian Council, and we have direct access to the national body. And it was at the same time, together at that time, South Africa was also going through a form of transition. And they were breaking their backs trying to get international recognition for everything, sport, health, whatever. So then that was the right time for this thing to have happened as well. And that's why the people like A.K. Singh and Ravi Govind and Kasim Sabri and many others from the colored community as well as the blacks, they joined hands and made something come right that was wrong.
And your life was dogged by the race issue, wasn't it?
By the way, I want to correct, it was not me in that group. I was a staff member of the National Council, and so was Mr. B.A. Naidu, and we didn't have anything to do with it because we sat there like staff members and listened and watched, and of course everybody was so happy with what was happening in that meeting. So that was a historic meeting that really changed everything for the National Council, and we were very happy after that.
As I was saying, your life was dogged by the race issue. In 1950, you had to play the role of God. Now, here, Dr. Ramasar, this was a time when the National Party had just enacted the Population Registration Act and the Race Classification Act. And social workers like Dr. Ramasar had to contend with situations where they had to put up with abandoned babies of unknown parentage. Now, how do you determine the race or ethnicity of that particular child? How did you do it? I don't know. Perhaps you could tell us.
Yeah, well, that's how it became. A baby was abandoned, and we would be asked to come, a social worker from each of the race groups in Durban. So 4 of us used to go there, what did we have to say? What did we do? How could you, a newborn babies that were born and picked up in shoe boxes and paper packets and in banana leaves and so on, we had to go and tell them that this child should be identified as either Indian or colored or a black child. Black and white were all right because they were black and white, and that's easy. But it was the two babies that were born of mixed parentage. And there was doubt about those babies. So we had to go and tell them. Now we couldn't tell them that this must happen or that, and it was ridiculous. You can't just. And we had to tell the department that a baby's appearance changes almost daily, a newborn baby. So you can't expect us to give you a clear answer as to how the child should be classified. But this was the kind of thing that one had to do, a ridiculous kind of thing that one had to do. And we were, very often we ended up with arguments with the department's officials on that.
Now, domestic violence, failed marriages, homeless single mothers were very much the social ills even in those days. Now, how serious a problem were these? Perhaps you could give us some anecdotes of some of the experiences you encountered there. Of these failed marriages, divorces, and homeless mothers.
That was a problem that we dealt with all the time. Unmarried mothers who couldn't afford to raise their own children, and or parents who were going through divorces and fighting over the children. And it was one of those things that child welfare was made for that. Child welfare societies were made for that, to look at those kinds of problems. And we had different ways of handling the children in need of care. Of course, the Children's Act always had definitions of the child in need of care. But there was a lot more to those definitions that we saw with our eyes that were put into the Children's Act. But mothers who couldn't look after their own children or raise their own babies, I'm talking about unmarried mothers, there had to be some other alternative care arranged for that child. And it wasn't as if we just went and got people to go and come and take the baby. We did a study of people and evaluated and did all kinds of studies to satisfy ourselves that they would be ideal to look after other people's children. But though even amongst those different categories of care, it was necessary to study people, to see whether they are capable of taking on these responsibilities of taking care of other babies. And adoption was one of the safe ones because those were supposed to be permanent care for the child. And we were not interested in satisfying only those people who wanted a baby, and caring for the ones who had to give up their child. But it was the child that was our priority for attention, and we had to really find good homes and build up a register of people who are potential adopters or foster care families and so on.
Now, when children, with the spotlight on children, now when children ask you, why can't my parents attend to my needs? Or who are my parents? Why have they abandoned me? Why am I hungry? How do you reach out to this?
You have to work with each child according to his needs. And you have to work with each child according to his or her age. Because even the little ones, you had to know how to sit down and talk to a child who was looking for it, who finds his life so strange that there are strangers all around him, nobody is his own, and he wants to belong to somebody. So, a social worker had to be that kind of person who could work with those people, with those children, at any age. And you had to also be observant enough to see in their body language, in the way they behaved, and so on. Sometimes very loud, and sometimes sullen and sitting in one corner. But for them, not having their own parents, they really did express these feelings. And, following that up to adulthood, they surely would come to you at some stage and ask you, tell me, who were my parents? Who was my birth mother? Unfortunately, child welfare used to have very good, full records of all their placements. And we could, at a certain time, tell the people, tell the adults who their parents were, or who was the birth mother, and so on. And why did she have to abandon them? They hated the word abandon when they became adults.
Now, amid your exhaustive schedule of social work, you lecture at the Sultan for the erstwhile Sultan Technical College, and then at the University of Natal. You've been there for some years, and as Nirod pointed out in his introduction, you are overlooked for full professorship, despite being a senior lecturer. Undaunted, you decide now I'm going to take up the Fulbright Scholarship and pursue my PhD. So you head off to the United States at the University of Cleveland. In 1987, you graduate with a PhD. You return to the University of Natal, and still you feel the glass ceiling. You're overlooked for promotion. You decide now is the time for me to retire. 1990, you and your husband both decide to retire, and you head off on a matcha holiday to India. But the chalkboard at the classroom still begs. You come back from your holidays. 5 years later, you return to the university and you lecture community development.
That was not a very good part of my life. I retired from National Council, and then I also retired from Natal University. And both organizations, I retired from National Council at a time when I should have retired. But both the organizations needed me again. And they called for me. And with National Council, I was most pleased to go back and help. Why? Because they had called me specifically to carry out the amalgamation process. So, that for me was, well, I can't express in words how much joy it brought to me, because I couldn't say no to National Council. And I was going away on a holiday with my husband after a very long time. My son will tell you here that my husband was not a great believer in taking long leave from his work. But we had decided that this time it's going to be something for ourselves, and we're not going to worry about anything else. National Council contacts me and said, wouldn't you like to come and start work with us? So I said, well, we already decided we're going to go on a holiday. And how do I say this to my husband now? So they said to me, okay, we'll decide about it. Before you go on your holiday, we'll let you know what's the decision. You'll let us know what's the decision. So before I went on the holiday, council knew that I was going to come back and join them. And that was fun, that was nice. Because I was appointed as regional manager for the Natal region. And my sole responsibility was to amalgamate, you know, we used to have 4 child welfare societies in one city. 3 child welfare societies somewhere else. You know, always a plural of societies. So and that is costly. But however, you know, for apartheid, they didn't mind spending all that extra money. So I had the job of trying to get these people to come together, all 4 organizations, to make them into one child welfare. Right. And I was very happy about that because that gave me the opportunity to exercise my social work role as a change agent. And this was not going to be just any kind of change. It was going to be a systemic change. We are going to remove the race factor, and everybody was going to become one organization. 4 organizations were going to be one. So that for me was fine. But when I was asked by Natal University to come back on a contract basis for a year, and what for? To teach community development. Well, my first reaction was, and people asked me too, how come are you going to accept that? And you know, I said, well, I'll have to give it some thought. And I knew that one of the reasons was that they couldn't get another lecturer at that time to replace, to fill that vacancy. So I went back to Natal University, and the only reason I went there was to help the students. Because, and also the fact that I couldn't repeat what was done wrongly to me at the university to students who are innocent of all those things. So I went back in order to complete or help the students to complete their studies for that year. And that was when I went back to Natal University for that short time. But Natal University never recognized me for any promotion. So there was a lot of bad blood between us at that time. Not overt, but there it was. It was when I was studying at university in Cleveland, along came a letter from home, from the university, to ask me to put an advertisement for a head of department on the notice board at the university there. And I you know, coming from South Africa, and a good Indian girl, brought up nicely, I couldn't just take the law in my own hands. So I went and I was going on for one of the tuition sessions, and I asked the tutor, I had this thing come from home, and I'd like to put this on the notice board. And he looked at it and said, oh. So he looked at that and he said, what are we training you for? I said, but now they've asked me to do this. Is it all right for me to do? He took it from my hand and he tore it to put bits and pieces and put it in the waste paper basket. And he says, you know, we're training you. And they were cocksure that I was going to go to a professorship at the University of the town. Nobody knew that Fatima Mir never got a full professorship. She had an associate professorship because she was Fatima Mir and she was not white. And we were 2 Indian women. So I don't know whether it was the wrong genders.
Well, friends, you know, for over 50 years, Dr. Ramasar has been bringing comfort and to poor people, the neglected, etc. But I can tell you, she also hobnobbed with some of the most eminent celebrities as well. Among them, none other than civil rights leader, Nobel Peace Laureate, Reverend Martin Luther King, taking lunch with him, and U.S. Vice President Hugh Humphrey. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that and rounding up your book. And we wish you every success with the publication.
Well, I had when I first went into that group, there were about 157 of us from about 80 or so countries, and we all, strangers to one another. But the India group didn't want to accept me as an Indian because they didn't think I was an Indian. I was in my sari and I had my little doctor on the forehead and everything. And they also saw that my diet was something different from everybody else's. So, but they didn't. They had their vertical. And the person who was the leader of this group, CIP, Cleveland International Program for Social Workers, he said to me at the university, at one of the universities, over the college in Cleveland, we were having dinner there, and he said to me, wouldn't you say the grace for us for the evening? And I said, yeah, sure. I had the advantage of better English than the others because we were a mixed group of every country in 87 countries. We had all the Spanish and the Portuguese and everybody there. But I was the English person speaking English. And so I said, yes, I'll say the grace. And of course I said it in Sanskrit. He told me, yeah, you can say it in Sanskrit. So I said it in Sanskrit. And they came to me, and we had, that was still not satisfactory. But I sang a song at one of the evenings, social evenings, at camp, very well. And they couldn't believe it. They said, you can sing any song. So we sang, my little paper said to sing a song, so I sang a song. Oh, they came running after me, sat around me and mischievously, said to me, wouldn't you give us a copy of that song? You could write it in English if you want. The Hindi song in English. So I said, okay, fine. And I sat down with them and I started writing the song in Hindi. So they really believed that I was a Pakka Hindi person from South Africa. And as far as Hubert Humphrey and I are concerned, we shared a table at the farewell party of the Washington. When we shared a table. We sat at a table at lunchtime with Martin Luther King Jr. And he had been in Cleveland to advise the people on fair housing. And my friend, one of my host families, he took me there to that particular function, and we shared this table with Martin Luther King. And it was such a wonderful experience to sit and listen to him chat about things. And of course, if you're in South Africa, there was lots to talk about for everybody. And that's how it was.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
South Africa is the fact that we've been unsuccessful, and I'm looking at Reshma and telling you this, we have been unsuccessful in having one united social work association in the country. In my time in social work, there were 3 or 4 different social work associations in the country, for each to be different. And I think that one of the things that I would very much like to see is to see more unity amongst social workers and one body. And also, I would like the social work curriculum to change, because that is about curriculum for the first word. And we are about entering into the 4th or 5th word now. So we really need to have a different social work curriculum worked out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramasar. Before I open the floor for questions, I think her career has gone a full cycle in terms of social work and healthcare in South Africa. And I'm reminded of a very poignant case she writes about in her book on a young adopted girl who was made pregnant by her brother and came to her quite distraught. You remember that story, Hamid? And in handling in this crisis, I think it was quite a huge challenge for Dr. Ramasar. She managed to marshal at one of the first counseling sessions the help of a psychologist and a medical doctor and herself. And which got me thinking that in today's South African society, if one was faced with such a challenge, would one be able to marshal such resources at short notice to manage this crisis like the one you faced? Because have we as a society in South Africa gone from terrible to kind of mediocre, and we're heading back to terrible? Is that where you see social work and healthcare in general going? Or is there some light now that there's unification? Yes. Okay. But she, in the final chapter, in the conclusion, she draws the whole book quite nicely and roundly in terms of social commentary and quite a philosophical discourse on the meaning of life and the meaning of being one's brother's keeper and looking after society broadly. I think that's the message I took home. I'm not going to read your closing statement because I'd like to close the evening with that statement. But in your career, have you seen South African society go that full circle? Go that full circle from being, awful and terrible, and then getting into some kind of mediocrity. In that case study, where you managed to get a psychiatrist and a medical doctor and yourself to handle the crisis. I was thinking that could never be done today. Okay, all right, okay. I think it's up to us to read the book. Instead of hogging the mic, can I open the floor for questions before I read your closing statement? Any questions?
Repeat your question,
Okay, in your book, in your book, you write about a very traumatic case in which a young girl, an adopted child, was impregnated by her brother, came to you distraught, wanting to commit suicide, etc. And you marshaled the resources of a psychologist, a psychiatrist, one of them, a medical doctor, and yourself. And that may have been in the mid-70s. Do you think we could marshal those kinds of resources when faced with crises like this today in South Africa, given its healthcare and social work environments, and the depravity that exists in those two fields? That one case, yes. But I'm talking more broadly about how you got the resources you required to deal with it.
Well, that was just one of the cases that came to my attention. There could have been more. The question of the whole community being estranged when the Group Areas Act came. And that was another thing that affected the Indian community a lot, because the Indian communities were all nicely settled in their little places wherever they were. But came the Group Areas Act, and everyone disappeared into larger, other areas of the world, of the country, and some people left the country. And this particular couple, they were young people in this in this community, and they were, socializing and so on. But they were aware of being cousins, but they didn't realize that they were more than cousins. And of course, the young lady became pregnant, and she wanted to have an abortion, and she went to the doctor, and the doctor said no, it was too late to give her an abortion. Referred her to the Child Welfare Society, so that we could at least look after her and place her baby in adoption. That would have been a non-disclosure adoption. So we had to do that eventually. It took a long time. I mean, I could write that in a paragraph in a book, but what it took me over, it was a very long stretch of time that we had to do a lot of work with every individual in that particular close circle. It was very difficult. And finally, we had to get all kinds of tests done, genetic tests and so on. And on non-disclosure, she didn't have, non-disclosure, the mother doesn't see the baby at all. According to the child is born, and the baby is taken away immediately, away from the mother. So she didn't know who adopted the child. But I can't express to you what went through that family at that time. Because there was that whole family to me looked like they had been, become strangers to one another. Some of them were overseas and some were here. And they didn't know, and there were some of them were, holier than thou kind of attitude, and the others were more accommodating of her and so on. But she was at the end of her tether. We had to be very careful with her because she was also suicidal at one point. And it was difficult to handle that. It went over months and months. And between the hospital and us at the Child Welfare, and social workers and the psychologists and the doctors in charge, it was just no joke, that particular part.
Thank you. Yes, you did answer the question. I'd like to open the floor again if there's any questions that come to mind. In her book, she does quote Minister Zola Speia when he was Minister of Social Welfare, and his reading of the writing on the wall in terms of South Africa and the poverty it faces. And I want to point out another thing. An award-winning author, one of my favorites, is Amitabh Ghosh. And he always says that the best way for a writer to write is with two computers open. One in Google and one on the script. And bear in mind that this book was written in longhand. And she quotes the Children's Act and the United Nations declarations, so accurately. So the work that was done in going into putting this manuscript together, the reason I thought of that is the quote she uses from Zola Speia came out of the Sunday Tribune of 1998 or something like that. But the kind of research and painstaking work that goes into this kind of book is not often appreciated when you read it as just the reader. But I've seen the work that's gone into this, and especially for somebody who's now 92, it's a great achievement. And I'd like to thank you. If there's no other questions, I'd like to close the evening by reading the final parting message, as she calls it. A parting message is that there is nothing strange in the thoughts expressed herein for an intercultural country like South Africa to work on the creation of a more acceptable social order from a moral, spiritual perspective too. While separate cultures, individually and together, continue to observe Ubuntu, Pramda, and other such concepts, there is no denying that the spirit embodied in such observances goes beyond the parameters of culture. In saying that, thank you very much for your attendance. There's refreshments at the back, and please get a book from them on the inside. Thank you very much.